Hi, I'm Mitchell Southerland, Director of Production at Music Theater Wichita, coming to you today from our scene shop, where I'll show you how to assemble your prop flicker candle as part of our Apprentice program in a box. The Apprentice program at Music Theater Wichita is designed to give area high school students the chance to see what life is like behind the scenes. Apprentices volunteer 2 weeks of their time to join us here, the first week being spent in the shop of their choice, learning how to do the build portion of a process or the rehearsal portion of the process, and then spend the second week actually running the shows alongside our professional staff and our stagehands. Apprentices can be here for as many 2-week stints as they'd like. They can either be here for the single show, which represents that initial 2 weeks, or they can be here for all 10 weeks of the summer, representing the 5 shows that we put on. All we ask is that they have a willingness to learn and an interest in what goes on behind the scenes in the various production departments. We offer apprenticeships in nearly all of our behind-the-scenes production departments, so if you're a high schooler or the parent of one, you can be assured that there'll be plenty of opportunities to learn a wide variety of topics during an apprenticeship at Music Theater Wichita. Production departments include carpentry, costumes, scenic art, electrics, sound, wigs and makeup, props, and stage management. The project that we're going to be working on today is going to tie in several of these areas I've just mentioned. There's elements of carpentry, of props, some scenic art, electrics, and then finally at the end, we're going to tie in stage management as you call a real section from one of our shows from a past season. So without further ado, let's open the box and see what's inside. The Apprentice program in a box opens from the front, and whenever you receive it, the interior should look something like this. You may have a t-shirt and a set of instructions on top as well. We've removed those just for the sake of clarity here. Inside the box, in the upper corner, you'll find a hot glue gun in this box, as well as several spare glue sticks. We won't use nearly all of them, so you'll have plenty of glue sticks to do other crafts with after the fact. Other tools you'll find in here, 12-foot tape measure, Phillips head screwdriver, couple of brushes. We have a wider brush for putting on larger amounts of paint, and then we have a really fine detail brush for doing highlights and shadows later on. You'll also find just a standard pencil. You'll find a paint kit as well as a little container of some glue. You'll notice that the paint is numbered 1, 2, 3. The first one is an off-white sort of parchment color. The second is burnt umber, and then the third is raw umber. The smaller container here, as I mentioned, is labeled with a G, and that's actually wood glue for later on. Additionally, in the box, you'll find 3 pieces of wood. Looks something like this, and then a bottom piece as well. These are what your candle will actually sit in. These are the base pieces of the candle base. So for the sake of this video and the sake of the instructions that are in the box, we're going to call this the upper assembly, this piece right here, the upper base assembly. We'll call this sort of squared off donut shape the lower base assembly. And finally, we'll call this the bottom cap. This is what's actually going to hold all the electronics in place once the whole thing is assembled. The upper assembly has a hole here for the PVC to actually sit in as the candlestick, and then there's a square hole here for the on-off switch that we're going to install. On the lower base assembly, the square donut piece, make note of this small channel that's cut in the underside of it. That's for the power cord to come out later on. That'll become relevant as we get further into the project. And then on the bottom cap piece, there is a right side up and a upside down. You'll notice that on the 4 drill holes here, one side has them sort of bored out a little bit more in sort of a more shallow divot. That's actually the bottom side that's going to be facing against the tabletop when this is all said and done. That divot is there so that the heads of the screws can sit nicely and fleshly against the surface of this and won't be protruding out. So make note of all that and set those to the side. We have your actual PVC stick that will make the body of the candle. We have 2 pieces of sandpaper here. We have a 100 grit and then a 210 grit. One is coarser than the other. The 100 grit is the coarser of the two for taking off more wood. It's the first one we'll use. And then the 210 is for doing a little bit of final polishing to make it really nice. Additionally, there's the actual flicker candle itself, the bulb that comes with it. There's a small parts bag here. You'll find 5 Phillips head screws in here. We give you 1 extra just in case one gets lost in the assembly process. There's also 3 Wago connectors, is what we call these. They're wire clips, sort of the same as a wire nut or a splice or something like that. But we found that these are pretty simple to use as far as making electrical connections and are really ideal for a project like this where we're just trying to introduce the basic principles of electrical work. We have an on-off switch here, on-off. Obviously the 0 is off and the straight line is on. Just want to make sure that it's in the off position for the entire time that we're assembling this. We have the bulb base, lamp base. It might be kind of tied up on itself so you can untie it and straighten it out. There might be a couple of pieces of the jacket still attached to the bottom of the leads here. You want to go ahead and pull those off. Those are just there for protecting them. And go ahead and set that to the side. And then finally, at the very bottom, you'll have your power cord. Now, obviously, this probably goes without saying, but you won't want to plug this in until it's all assembled and all completed. We're going to talk a little bit about that now with some more specific warnings. So let's talk about a few warnings before we get started. The hot glue gun obviously is going to get hot during the course of melting the glue for the project. Be careful and don't touch the silver tip on the front of the gun, and use this little foot that swings out here to give it a base to sit on as you're working with it. Second, this on-off switch, I mentioned this while we were identifying the parts, but make sure that it's in the off position. Make sure that the O on the top of the switch is depressed fully. That way there wouldn't accidentally be any current flowing through it at any given time. The colors on all of the wires in this project all have their own pairs. So there's a pair of white cables, for instance, and there's a pair of red cables, for instance, and finally a pair of black cables. And there's only ever 2 of any one color. So when in doubt, make sure that you're matching up the colors with each other to keep you on the right track. And finally, just a word about this power cord. Now, obviously, this can be a little bit hazardous if you're not paying attention. So what you'll need to do is make sure that this is never ever plugged in during the course of working on this project. The only time it's acceptable to plug this in is when it's all put together and you have it all closed up and you're ready to test it out. You'll notice in the video that anytime I'm working with this plug-in, you will see the plug end right next to my project on the table. That's to make sure that I remember to not plug it in, but also so that a friend doesn't come along and plug it in for me thinking that I have accidentally unplugged it. It's very, very, very important that you do not plug this in until the project is completed all the way through. And I'll be very clear about when that can happen on this video and in the written instructions as well. So that's all the information we need to get prepped for this project. I'm going to bring you in, give an overhead view of what's going on, and you can feel free to pause if you need to and get caught up or advance to the various timestamps. We'll have those in the description of whatever social media this ends up on. And that way you can come back to the project if you need to and just kind of work at your own pace. There's no time limit on this. You can really just enjoy this, take your time with it, make it your own, and hopefully at the end of it you'll have something that you can be proud of. And then come and join us next year and you can do the real thing behind the scenes with us here at Music Theater Wichita. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is grab our piece of PVC from the box. Now, you'll want to look closely at the PVC at both ends and make sure that both ends are square. It can happen that in the course of making these PVC pipes that one side ends up slightly cut at an angle. So there's a couple of things you can do. You can either take your sandpaper and sand down the uneven end until it's square, or you can just identify the unsquare end and make that the top of your candle. The reason being is we want the square end to sit flush into the base once we go to mount the piece in there. So just pay attention to that. And then we're going to grab our candle socket here. Go ahead and unwind it if it's still wound up on itself. And then here on the end, you'll notice your candle or your candle socket may have the two ends covered with some pieces of the jacket still. What you can do is just take those and pull them straight off, and that'll expose your two ends there. If your kit has them already pulled off, it's no big deal. Sometimes they fall off. So if they're not, go ahead and pull those off, and then we'll want to feed the wires through the PVC. And then you'll notice that the socket kind of wants to slide down into the PVC. We don't want that to happen. We kind of want this to fit just a little flush on there. In fact, we want there's kind of a lip on the socket you can see right there. We want that lip to sit basically right on the edge of the PVC, kind of like that. So in order to get it to stay like that, we'll take our hot glue gun and just put a little bead of glue on the underside of that lip. You just do it in a couple of places here. And you want to work quick because this hot glue will dry very, very fast. So we'll do that. We'll kind of get it roughly put into place like that and then let it dry. And after those first couple of beads are dry, we'll just go back and put a little ring around the whole outside here. Later on in the process, we'll come back and we'll build up more layers of hot glue to kind of create the wax texture. But for now, we're just trying to get that socket base to hold in place. Make sure you don't get any glue down into the socket itself, because that could interfere with the screwing in of the lamp later on. For these next couple of steps, I'm going to hand it off to one of our props artisans here at Music Theater Wichita, Allie Bowman. She's going to teach us how to do the layering of the wax along the edge as well as the paint treatment to give your candle that realistic appearance.
So I've already started the glue drops, and I'm going to show you how I'm making these with the hot glue gun. So I am just, as I push it out, I'm letting it fall. I'm not pressing the glue gun against it, I'm just letting the glue fall onto the PVC and then pressing more out and letting it in one long line drop down. And then when it's at the end, making sure that all of those glue strings are, the way you get those is you kind of twirl it. So that is how you make the glue drops. And so that one looks unnatural with the others, so I'm going to just blend it in. More glue. So you're wanting it to look heavier at the top, besides like maybe a drip down at the bottom, but it wants to look like the glue, like, because when a candle heats up, it expands at the top because of the heat, and then the natural shape of the candle would remain the same. So it's heating up and expanding and getting larger at the top, and then still remaining its natural shape at the bottom, just with drips. Okay, so here's the completed candle that I painted, just missing the flame and anything else with wiring. When you're doing the steps, I did 2 coats of the first number 1, which is an antique white, just to do a base coat. And while the white was still wet, I blended the number 2 up near the top. so that it had a sort of ombre look. So it's a little darker and then lighter here. After that, I went through with the number 3 and I added shadows under all of the drips. And then I went back in and I added highlights with the number 1 at the ends and just along the top to make sure that the parts that would be getting light from the candle are lighting up. And there's the completed candle.
Once you're done applying the wax texture and doing the painting, your candle should look something like this. If it doesn't, that's fine. There's a whole lot of variety in these sorts of things. If you make a mistake, don't worry about it. You can take some sandpaper and rough up the paint texture if you want and try and reapply it. But really try not to think about it too much, because more often than not, a prop like this is going to go in a candelabra or something like that that's going to have a whole bunch of these. And so the more variety, the better, really. So just don't think about it too much. Just give it a shot, do the best you can, and if it doesn't look like this, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure you get it to some state of doneness before you move on to the next part. For this part, we're going to start preparing the base section. So you'll remember from whenever we were identifying the pieces that there's the upper base assembly, which is this part, the lower base assembly, which is this part, and then the bottom cap piece. Go ahead and set the bottom cap piece off to the side because we won't be using that for a little while. Using these two upper and lower assembly pieces, grab your sandpaper. On the undersides, there's going to be one that's labeled 100 and one that's labeled 210. And what those numbers correspond to is the amount of grit in the sandpaper. So the lower number has fewer particles, but they're bigger, and so they're more apt to take off big chunks of wood as you're just trying to get the general shape taken care of. The higher number means that there's more pieces of sand on the sandpaper, but that they're smaller grit, and so this is more for sort of your finish polishing step. So first, taking the 100 grit, you'll probably want to go outside for this, but just take that sandpaper and kind of double it over on itself, and then just start sanding it. Sand all around this top surface. You can even do the bottom surface if you want. That's not strictly necessary, but get all these edges, knock down any big things. Do that same thing with the bottom assembly piece. And then once you're done with the 100 grit, switch over to your 210 grit and do the exact same thing. And you'll notice that this kind of gives it a smoothness and a shine that the other one doesn't. And then when you're done with that, bring all your pieces back inside, make sure all the dust is cleared off of them, knock off all the dust you can, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, for this next step, we're going to do a little bit of measuring and laying out before we actually glue the two pieces of the bottom together. So if you look at these two squares and take your tape measure, you can measure the sides, and they should be pretty close to perfect squares. The larger bottom assembly piece is going to be a 5-inch square, and the smaller top assembly piece is going to be a 4-inch square. Now, ideally, we want this to sit in the dead center of the bottom piece. So the easiest way to do that is to take the difference of these two sizes. So if this one's 5 inches and this one's 4 inches, you subtract that, that leaves you with 1 inch. Because we want it to be centered, if we were to just measure out the 1 inch from one side, it would be completely over to the one side, and that doesn't look very good. So you'll take that 1 inch remainder and actually divide it into a 1/2 inch. So what we're looking for is a 1/2 inch on all sides to get the proper indentation. So what you can do is use your tape measure here. There's a little locking mechanism on the front that you can use to hold the tape measure out like this. And you'll go over to your big piece here and just kind of hook the little tine on the end to the end of your piece, and then find a 1/2 inch and then mark that on your piece of wood. Do that here. And then just keep going around and doing that on all corners. And then we'll reverse the direction for the other side. And now that we have these little markers all laid out, what you can do is you can actually take the bottom cap piece, or a ruler if you have one of those in your house, just anything that's relatively straight, and you can line up those little marks you just made. And take your pencil and just strike a line down the whole way, and just do that with all your sides here. And for this application, that's going to be a pretty good guideline. It's not exact, but it doesn't need to be for this particular project. So do a little test fit, take your top piece, and just kind of line it up with those lines, and you should see that it's pretty darn close. Our next step is going to be to glue these two pieces together. So what we'll do is we'll take the top part off, set it to the side, and then take your little paint pod here that has the G logo on it and open that up. This is going to be your wood glue. And grab your wide brush here that you used for the painting on the candle itself. This is going to make a good applicator for this glue that's right here. And then just take a little bit of it. Try not to make too much of a mess. And then working inside of the lines you just made, just kind of spread that glue out. And don't be shy to really load up the paintbrush here and just spread that glue all the way out. What we're looking for is a nice even coating all the way around on the inside of this line that you just drew. And there's not a huge rush here, but you don't want to spend hours applying this glue. Wood glue does dry somewhat quickly. It's not going to dry as we're sitting here, and it certainly doesn't dry as quick as the hot glue we were working with earlier, but it will start to get tacky pretty quickly. So that's probably pretty good. Close up your glue container and set that to the side, and then wash your brush out. That way you don't ruin it, because leaving the glue in there is not great for it. Do that after this next step. Just set it to the side for the moment. And then take your upper piece and locate this little square hole here. This is where your switch is going to be. Before you go and place this on here, look at the bottom of this lower base assembly, and you'll notice that there's a little notch in one side. That's where the power cord is going to come out. It doesn't really matter where you put these relative to each other. You can have the switch over here or the switch on the same side as where the power cord's coming out. It really doesn't matter. I prefer to have the switch on the front and the power going out the back, so that's how I'm going to align this, but just make note of it and do whatever you feel like you want to do in that case. So we'll get this kind of squared off on here. There we go. And then you're going to want to grab something big and heavy to put on top of this, and then let it sit for 30 minutes, an hour, longer if you have the time for that. And then come back, and the wood glue should really hold it pretty tightly. Usually if this were a prop we were making during the summer, we might throw a staple or a brad nail in there to kind of give it a little bit of extra rigidity. But really and truly, the wood glue is what does the bulk of the holding for these things. And once that dries, this really should be very, very hard to take apart. So set it here for now. Find something big and heavy to set on top of it, and then come back in at least 30 minutes or an hour, or maybe even a little bit longer if you can wait. Okay, so it's been a little bit of time now. We've had the opportunity for these two pieces to dry. They don't want to come apart. You'd have to really try and force it to get them to break apart, and it's probably good enough to continue on with the project. So after giving that time to dry, what we want to do is we want to grab our finished painted candle and our on-off switch. So we're going to start setting things in place now, and it's actually going to start taking form. So you'll take your two ends from the socket that's embedded in the PVC, and you're just going to feed them through this small hole in the top here. And then the base of the PVC wants to sit in that wider hole that doesn't quite get drilled all the way through. Now, in order to hold this, what we want to do is we'll take these wires, and for the time being, we're just going to stuff them down here in the bottom so this thing will sit evenly. And we'll set this back down. And then we'll take our hot glue gun, and just along the bottom here, we can pull this out a little bit, we're going to apply like a little bead of glue around the whole thing to get it to stay in place. So kind of peeling this back, we're putting a little bit of hot glue down in the inside of this hole. And then we'll set the PVC candle right in place there. And hold it while it dries so it stays in place. After holding the candle for a little bit and giving it a chance to dry, we can put a little bead of glue around the base here just to give it a little bit of extra strength. And just go all the way around, kind of try and push the glue down into that crevice. All the way around. And then give that a chance to dry, and then we'll move on to our next step. All right, our next step is going to be to insert the on-off switch into this square hole right here. Again, you'll notice that there's an on the straight line here, and then off is the 0. Make sure that it's switched to off anytime you're working with this. And then the actual orientation within the hole doesn't so much matter. You could have the on the right or on the left, kind of personal preference. It doesn't make any real difference where this project is concerned. So what we're going to do is take this and just run these wires through this hole. And then when we get down to the bottom here and we're inserting the actual housing, what we'll do is we'll put a little bead of glue underneath the lip here. There's a very, very small lip, and that's going to help hold it in place. It could be that the hole for your particular kit is really, really tight, so you might not even need to put glue in there. It's really kind of up to you as to how loose it feels. This one is pretty loose, so we're going to go ahead and just put a little dab of glue. And you'll notice on the switch, let me pull it back out here to show you. You'll notice on the switch that there are some flared out ends on either side. These are meant to compress whenever you push this down into the hole, so it's going to be a little hard to, it should go in pretty smoothly, but then the actual finishing of the pushing in should be somewhat hard because those two little fins are pushing out against the hole that's been drilled in. So we'll just put a little bit of glue here, just enough to hold it. We don't have to go all the way around. And then we'll push down, taking care not to get burned on the hot glue. And then we can come back and clean up the hot glue as it dries, make it look nice and pretty. And there. On-off switch is in place, and all your wires are run to the base of the candle. Okay, now comes the exciting part. This is actually the wiring of the candle that enables you to turn on the candle with just the flick of a switch. So I've already mentioned it a couple of times. It bears repeating just once more. As you're doing this part, it is incredibly important that you do not plug this end in. You'll see that this entire time that I'm working on this, I'm going to keep this end in sight. It's going to be right here next to me so that I know for sure that it's not plugged in at any stage of this whole operation. And then additionally, what you'll want to do is make sure that your on-off switch is in the off position for the entirety of this as well. When you're ready to move on, take the assembly, flip it over. I'm just going to set it over here so I can kind of see it and work on it. We'll pull out all of our wires and try not to put too much stress on the candle itself. It can break out of its housing there if you're not too careful. So there's 6 ends in total in this wiring setup. In fact, I'm going to move this right over here. There are 6 ends in total. The thing you need to do is, if you kind of look here on this one, for instance, you can see that the wires are a little bit kind of frayed. We want them to be a nice tight bundle. So the way you fix that is you grab the ends here and then sort of using a twisting motion, you just kind of grab all the strands and you twist them together on themselves until it's a nice tight bundle. And then you do that on all of these ends. Now, the thing to locate are your Wago wire clips. So these operate by means of a little lever that compresses the wire inside. It's really a pretty handy device that makes connecting multiple wires really easy. The way you use them is they'll come to you in their closed configuration, so the paddles are both down, you can see there. What you do is you take those paddles and you just flip them up, and they'll kind of click into place when they're open all the way. But you do that with these two, and there's definitely a stop where you can't open them anymore, but that's what they look like in their open position. They're kind of 90 degrees from where they were before. So we'll do that with the other two Wago clips as well. Okay, next, what we'll want to do is do a little bit of wire identification. So I mentioned earlier in this video that there are 3 colors in total. There's a white wire, red wire, and black wire, and they're all in pairs with each other. The goal of this next part is to get those pairs linked up into the 2 channels of this Wago wire clip. So we can see here from the switch has a red wire and a black wire. The socket has a black wire and a white wire, and then your power lead has, if you look on the inside of where these 2 lines are split, there should be a marking there. There's a red wire, you can see that right there, and a white wire, you can see that right there. And the goal is to get all of these connected with one another. So where we're going to start is actually the white end of the power cord here. So taking that white end right here, you will grab your Wago connector, move this up here so you know it's not plugged in. You're going to take your Wago connector and you're just going to insert that wire into the clip. And you may get a little bit of resistance. If you start getting resistance, kind of pull it out and re-twist the wires. The thing we don't want to have happen is as you start to put this in, it actually pushes against the wires and causes them to kind of balloon out and fray. We want this to stay pretty much nice and solid as if it were a solid strand of copper wire. So again, you'll just insert that into the connector. And if you look at the underside here of your connector, I'm going to try and get it so it's not reflecting too badly. You look on the underside, you should be able to see the end of the copper wire just about touching the back of the Wago connector. When you're at that point, you know that you're in as far as you should be going, and then you flip it back over and you just pop that paddle down. It'll make a little popping, snapping noise, and that's how you know it's affixed in the right way. And then you can just kind of take these 2 things and just pull on them a little bit, and the wire shouldn't want to pull out. If the wire does want to pull out, it's fine. Just pop that paddle back up, flip it up, and then take your wire out, re-straighten everything, put it back in the clip, and then click it back into place. The next step is to find, since this is the white wire, we're going to connect it to the corresponding white wire that comes from the socket. There's only one other white wire in this whole thing, so you know this is the right one to have. This is a little bit thinner, so it's going to be easier to put into the clip, but you just take it and you put it in the other side, and then click that down, and then give it a little pull, and if it doesn't pull out, then it's in good shape. The next step is to do the 2 black wires. So again, just making sure that your strands are all solid. Take your next connector and just feed the 2 black wires into either side. Which side doesn't matter for any of these. Just make sure that they're all matched up with their light colors. Black with black, white with white, and then red wire with red wire. After the black one is connected and we've tested to make sure that they don't want to pull out, we'll do the red wire last. So if you look here, there's a little marking right there on this power cord. So the red wires are connecting the power cord to the other side of the switch. Clip those 2 in place. And see, that one didn't want to go in, so it probably means that there's a stray wire. So we just tighten that back up again, try and reinsert it, and that time it went in. Flip it down, it's all solid. So what we have here are 3 connections made with all the pairs together. And then if we were to trace the electrical current coming through this circuit, we have our positive from the wall, which is the thinner blade, runs up this direction. That's the red wire here. It connects to the switch. The switch either will keep the circuit open or close the circuit so that the electricity is able to flow into the socket. In the off position, it means the circuit is open so that there's no way for the electricity to flow. It gets to the switch and then stops because it has nowhere to go. Whenever we flip the switch to the on position, what can happen is that the electricity continues to flow, so it goes down the black lead from the switch and then connects with the black lead from the socket, goes up into the socket, illuminates whatever is in the socket at that moment, and then the circuit is completed by the white wire that comes out of the socket and connects with the white wire from the power cord. Okay, now that we've got all of our connections made, we've double checked that they're all solid, we've triple checked that all the colors are together, our 2 black cables are here, our 2 red cables are here, and our 2 white cables are here. We're still unplugged. We still have the switch in the off position. The next thing to do is to dress these cables and get this ready to get closed up and make it look pretty. So you should be able to just kind of maneuver these cables around so that they all fit down in this cavity. It doesn't really matter if they touch each other. All of these wires are jacketed and shielded, so that's not a concern. So we'll do that. And they should be able to fit without too much forcing. Just kind of get them to lay down nicely. Something like that. And then what we'll do is on your power cable here, we're going to route that through the channel that's cut in the bottom of this lower base assembly. What we want to do is give it a little bit of slack into the base here so that it acts as a bit of a strain relief. What we don't want to have happen is for there to be no strain relief, and then whenever you go to plug this in, whenever you do, it pulls on all of this stuff and it wants to pull out of the assembly down here. So we're going to give it a little bit of slack, push a little bit more of that cord in there, and then hold it in place. And you might need a second person to do this if you want. But take your hot glue gun, and then we're just going to kind of affix that wire in place with a little bit of hot glue here. Give it a chance to dry. After the cable is initially put into place, there's a little bit more space here on the side. You can fill that in with hot glue too if you want, just to give it a little bit of extra strength. Try not to touch the cable with the tip of the hot glue gun, because that could burn a hole in the jacket of the power cable, and that's no good. But just kind of fill in the rest of that, give it a chance to dry really good, and then we'll move on to our next step. Okay, now that all the glue has had a chance to dry, all of our wires are kind of neatly compressed in there. You can see we're going to put the bottom cap piece on. So pay attention here. On this bottom cap piece, there's a right way to put it on and a wrong way to put it on. You'll notice that one side has holes that are simply just drilled all the way through. Nothing really special about that. But then on the other side, you'll notice that there's kind of like this divot or this pan shape to the holes. So that was done with a tool called a countersink. And what that does is whenever you go to assemble this, it gives the head of your screw a place to go. So you can see that the screw head kind of flares out, and that countersink gives it a place to sit. Whereas otherwise, you can kind of demonstrate here, if you didn't have that countersink and you go to screw it in, you'll see that the screw head wants to sit on top of the wood because there's no place for it to go. The sort of takeaway from that is that you want the countersunk side to be the one that goes against the surface you're going to set it on. So if you're looking at your bottom assembly here, you go to put the cap on, you want to see those countersink holes before you go screwing the 4 corners in. And there should be holes in your lower base assembly too that correspond to these holes. If it looks like they don't quite line up, it's possible that you might need to rotate this 90 degrees or 180 or 270 just to see that, you know, the holes do in fact line up in one of those orientations. So go ahead and kind of get them close to lined up, and then you'll start your first screw. Just kind of get it loosely, like finger tight in there. And then grab your Phillips head screwdriver, and we're just going to finish screwing these the rest of the way in. Hold short before tightening it down all the way. Let's get all the rest of our screws kind of started before we go and tighten all 4 of them at once. Okay, now that they're all loosely put into place, we're going to go around and tighten them down the rest of the way. Something that may happen, I hope it doesn't, but if it does, there's a way to fix it. It may be that in the course of screwing these down, you inadvertently split the bottom assembly piece here, just because you might be sitting on a weak spot in the wood, and a piece of your base could potentially kind of break away. If that happens, don't worry about it. It does happen every now and then. There is a way to fix it. You just take all the rest of these screws back out, take your base cap off, and then take some of that wood glue from earlier and just kind of paint it in the seam that broke off, and then sit there and kind of clamp it in place for a while the glue dries. And then you can come back and try and re-screw this in. Alternatively, the reason why we do screws here is so that you can access the electrical if you want to show it off, or have your folks look at it before it's all said and done. Alternatively, you can have them check your work and then just glue this bottom panel on as well. But for us, we're going to go ahead and tighten the rest of these down. Okay. It's looking like a finished product almost. So the next thing you can do, if you choose to do so, you can take whatever leftover paint you have, those 3 colors, and you can actually paint this base if you want, make it look like sort of older wood with those 2 brown colors if you want. Maybe do a few highlights on the edges with your parchment color. It's really up to you. Whatever you want to do in terms of finishing this aesthetically with some paint or whatnot, it's totally up to you. And you should feel 100% empowered to grab your brushes and just kind of finish making this look pretty. For now, what we're going to do is we're going to clear off our table, grab our lamp right here, open that up, and inside of here should be a little flicker bulb. You'll see what I mean here in a moment. I want to go ahead and screw that into the socket. Don't over tighten it, just get it snug. And now, once you're certain that everything is buttoned up and that everything is looking good and is to your satisfaction, make sure that your power switch is still switched to off, and then we can go and plug this in next. Okay, so this is the moment you've all been waiting for, when we actually get to plug this thing in and see that it works. So just plug this into the wall. I'm using an extension cord here just because I'm sitting in the shop, but really you want to plug this directly into the wall if you're doing it for yourself. Just go ahead and get that connected there. And then flip your power switch on when you're ready and have a look. So there you go. You'll want to make sure that you don't leave this unattended. Whenever you leave your room or leave your house, go ahead and switch it off when you walk away, just to be safe. And you now have your very own prop flicker candle. Well, hey, we're so glad that you could take part in this today. This is really a very special project. Thanks very much to the Shaw Family Foundation for helping fund this and get it off the ground. This is something we've been very excited to bring to you this summer and on into the future. This may end up being a periodic thing that we do every now and then, possibly with different projects. So just stay tuned with us and we'll let you know of any new projects that come along. Until then, be safe, be well, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.